The Russian forces have captured what remains of the industrial area in the eastern parts of the city of Pokrovsk, where the continued offensive operations gain full control over the city and cut off the intersections on the eastern parts to further isolate Milnerad from any escape from the city itself. Footage had come out that the Russians were striking Ukrainian positions within Rudinsky. However, it was revealed by Russian sources on the ground that this footage was old and they still do hold control over the city. There is no new Ukrainian infiltration into it or a renewed battle over it so far. The Ukrainians are attempting to establish positions, build up their forces for a counterattack, but no such infiltration has taken place. To the south of Milnerad, the Russians have started offensive operations towards Sukhyar and what remains under Ukrainian control of Lysivka, where the Ukrainians have begun a withdrawal towards Milnerad itself, to the north, where they are withdrawing from the towns to the fortifications and up towards the city, where they are forced to withdraw to avoid an encirclement, where the Russian forces will be pushing from the railway in the north and from the east to gain control over the fortifications and the southern outskirts of the city. Fighting continues all throughout the cities and on the flanks. As for the southwest of the city, the Russians consider offensive operations along the first and second lines of defense. Along the first line of defense, the Russians have started storming the fortifications from the south, where they have breached the anti-tank dishes and dragon teeth alliance, fighting in the direction of Novosibirsk and Nove. This is likely in combination with offensive operations from the north towards the fortifications in the south, where the Russian forces are attacking both from the northern and southern flanks to pressure the Ukrainians by pushing them in a pincer, where they are attacking both from the rear points, the weak point, and from the front head-on. If the Ukrainian forces redirected their forces to the north to face off against the flanking maneuver, then the southern flank would be exposed and the Russians are taking advantage of that. This is combined with offensive operations taking place within Uspinivka and along the Yanchur River, where the Russians have managed to gain control over additional forest lines to the south of Yehorivka, gaining control over the border between the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions. The Russians are here expanding their bridgehead across the Yanchur River in the direction of the highway, where they're looking to cut off the highway on a wide section of the front along the fortifications. This will allow them to cut off the supplies going to Hulyapole from the north. As the Russians are also exerting pressure on Danilivka in the north, and north of the river line, the Russians have secured the area in between Oleksivka and Novoalexandrivka, cutting off Ukrainian forces operating within the fortifications and forest lines of the area and gaining control over it, securing the eastern flank. And with this, the Russian offensive operations continue in the northern flank of the second line of defense to secure the flank of their positions held along the defensive line to prevent a Ukrainian reversal of the situation, as they have been attempting in the direction of Sosnivka, Novoselivka, Sichneve, and Oleksandrivka. To the northeast, in the direction of Kostiantynivka, the Russians continue offensive operations within the city, and to the southeast of it. To the southeast, the Russians have managed to gain control over the fortifications along the eastern flank of Ivanopilia, where they're launching offensive operations along the highway to gain control over the fortifications on the eastern flank, bypassing the town itself. And with the flanking maneuvers through the railway line, they are flanking their fortifications and putting them in a pincer on a smaller scale than first and second lines of defense within the Zaporizhzhia region. However, still the same tactic, where they're taking advantage of their flanking maneuvers to gain control of the fortifications and opening up the road towards the city itself. At the same time, positional fighting continues within the city in the rear of the fortifications, facing the eastern and southern directions. To the north of this, the Ukrainians counterattacked in the direction of Yampil, where geolocated footage confirms their presence in the northern parts of the town, following motorized assaults where the Ukrainian forces were looking to drop off the infantry in the northern parts of Yampil. However, Russian FPV drone activity was significant in the area and struck all of the vehicles in the video. This was a significant amount of forces that the Ukrainians were driving up towards Yampil with. Therefore, I'm leaving the town in a gray zone because there is active battles between the Russian and Ukrainian forces. There's a mix of their positions throughout the town, where the Russians are still present in the southern parts and central parts, and the Ukrainians are now present in the northern parts, and fighting continues mostly through FPV drone activity, but also with the soldiers fighting each other within the settlement. Whoever comes out on top will have a significant advantage in this section, as the Russians gain control over Yampil will allow them to cut off the highway between Liman and Siversk along the Seversk-Donetsk river line and gain a foothold in the direction of Ozerne on the eastern flank of the fortifications, combined with their current offensive operations in the direction of Debrova. At the same time, if the Ukrainians were able to regain control over Yampil, they would be able to cut off the road connections to the Russian forces operating in the outskirts of Liman, through which they can cut off the supplies and encircle the Russian forces alongside the entrance to the city. Therefore, the town of Yampil is extremely important for both sides to hold on to, as it is a deciding factor with regards to the current frontline situation. However, with the Russian activity further northeast of Liman, to gain control over the fortifications along the northeastern flank will allow the Russians to remove the importance of Yampil by securing the positions along Sarishne and the open fields. However, it will only lessen, not completely erase, the importance of Yampil, because the forest patch area also gives cover for the Russian infantry to reach Liman, while in the northeastern flank you would have to drive through to open fields, which is much more vulnerable to Ukrainian drones in comparison, and that is why the Russian advances are mainly through the forest line areas and forest patch areas, both in the western flank of Sarishne and the southern flank through the forest patch area. In the northern direction, in the direction of the eastern parts of Kupiansk, the Russians continue offensive operations, where they have now advanced on the eastern bank of the Oskar River line through the road here west of the railway line, where they've managed to reach the northern outskirts of the eastern parts of Kupiansk. With this, the Russians have crossed the river line and advanced alongside the eastern bank, and they're looking to connect their forces to gain control over the industrial area in the western parts of Kupiansk and to gain full control over the city. The fighting currently centered around the industrial area in the western parts, then there's the major industrial area in the eastern parts. The eastern section of Kupiansk is largely industrial, with not a wide area of residential buildings. Mainly around the railway line, the Russians are looking to gain full control over the eastern parts and then advance further south towards Kupiansk-Veslovy, which is the main defensive town of the Ukrainians in the area following the loss of Kupiansk, and the only town that is along the Oskar River line which completely remains under Ukrainian control. In conclusion, the Russian offensive operations in the Kupiansk direction is not slowing down. Instead, they are attempting to secure additional supply lines to both banks of the Oskar River line within Kupiansk itself, as the capture of the railway line all the way up to the eastern parts of Kupiansk and the capture of the eastern parts of Kupiansk will allow additional roads into Kupiansk through the Oskar River line and lessen their reliance on their foothold and bridgehead across the Oskar River line. In combination with this, if they are able to secure Pyshane in the south and the highway leading up towards Petropavlivka, Kucherivka, and then Kupyansk, then they will have the highway connection to Svetove as well, which significantly strengthens their supply situation for the forces operating within Kupyansk. This update is the first one in the new month, where the advances throughout October has been archived, where throughout the month of October, the Russians managed to capture approximately 649 square kilometers, the majority of which was within the Donetsk region, where they captured several hundred square kilometers. As for the Dnipropetrovsk region, the Russians captured about 120 square kilometers, in the Zaporizhia region about 100 square kilometers. In the Kharkiv region, there was several advances there as well. The Luhansk region did not see any developments at all, while the Sumy region saw a net gain of 3 square kilometers in favor of the Ukrainians. The Kherson region saw the first developments in a very long time, as the updates throughout the months from January all the way to October, including advances within October, were recorded for approximately 45 square kilometers gained in favor of the Russians. From this, we see that the Russians currently control 99.83% of the Luhansk region, 79.89% of the Donetsk region, which is a 1% increase for the month of October. Zaporizhia sees 76.48% under Russian control, and Kherson sees 75.53% under Russian control. The Dnipropetrovsk region has the first percentage under Russian control, same with Mykolaiv and Sumy region, where the Russians control 1% of each of these regions. And with the 43 square kilometers captured in the Kharkiv region, the Russians now capture exactly 5% of the Kharkiv region. As for the first day of November, we now see a new variant of the Russian, let's call them improv tanks, where we see this variant, which is a bush tank or porcupine tank, whatever you want to call it, where it has bushes on top of the tank, as well as an electronic warfare system at the very point of it. From this, we can see that the Russians are using these vehicles through the forest lines and forest patch areas, hiding them from drone reconnaissance, where it is difficult to detect the tank with these bushes on top of it, and it can act with long-range fire support from the forest lines, where the Ukrainians will have a difficulty detecting them. The Ukrainians are already using a lot of these similar usages, as we've seen from footage from Iskander strike and such, where it is difficult for the Russians, even with long-range reconnaissance drones, to detect these vehicles. Of course, it's not perfect. Both sides will still be detecting these vehicles, but it has become more difficult as both sides continue with new improvisations along the battlefield. And once these have been proven to work, they adapt it in some manner at the industrial level. So we're currently seeing the Russians have first started with the cope cages, which then turned out to be everyone uses it cages because it simply helps. And that is enough for both sides to keep using them. And we're seeing that across the entire front. New variations, the turtle tank, and now the porcupine tank. We're seeing different animals being used to come up with ideas for these different inventions. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.